A life of luxury and silence. The Westwood Mansion stood like a modern-day palace, a fortress of glass and marble designed to showcase wealth and power. It was the kind of estate that made people stop and stare, the kind that symbolized status and success. But inside, it was silent. The kind of silence that weighed heavy, pressing into every corner, filling every space with something unspoken. And Charlotte Westwood had grown used to it. The millionaire's wife. She stood before the full-length mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the delicate clasp of her diamond necklace. The cream-colored silk dress draped elegantly over her frame, hugging her in all the right places. She looked perfect, immaculate, graceful, the epitome of a millionaire's wife. But as her eyes traveled over her own reflection, she saw it. The dullness in her gaze. The way her lips didn't quite curve into a smile anymore. Charlotte took a deep breath and forced herself to stand tall. Appearances mattered, even if the life behind them was slowly unraveling. The cold distance, the familiar sound of the front door clicking shut sent a ripple through the quiet house. A moment later, she heard Graham's footsteps, strong, deliberate, the stride of a man who was always in control. She hesitated for just a second before stepping out of the bedroom and making her way downstairs. Maybe today would be different. Maybe today they would have a real conversation. She found Graham Westwood standing near the entrance, his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in that authoritative tone he reserved for business. His tailored suit fit him like it was made for royalty, and his dark hair was perfectly styled. Every inch of him screamed power and precision. He ended the call with a quick tap of his phone, barely glancing up before slipping it into his pocket. Charlotte forced a smile. Busy morning. Always. One word. Distant. Final. She swallowed, ignoring the familiar ache in her chest. I was hoping we could have breakfast together. It's been a while. Graham glanced at his gold wristwatch. The light caught the expensive metal, making it gleam like a trophy. I wish I could, he said, his voice clipped, already moving toward the door. I have meetings all day. Charlotte's fingers clenched slightly against the fabric of her dress. She tried to keep her tone light. I suppose those include lunch with your new business partner. Graham didn't even hesitate. Vivian and I need to go over our travel itinerary. Vivian. Of course. Charlotte felt the name settle in the air between them like an unwanted guest. Vivian Hart, the woman who had effortlessly slid into Graham's world. Always at his side. Always too close, too familiar. She had seen it before. The way Vivian laughed at his jokes. The way Graham leaned in when she spoke. The way he had slowly started to disappear from their life. And now he was leaving again. This time, not for a business trip, but for weeks of luxury vacations in Europe and the Maldives. With her. The moment of realization. Charlotte could feel the words pressing against her throat, demanding to be spoken. She wanted to ask, when did I stop being enough for you? But she already knew the answer. She had felt it in the late-night silences. She had seen it in the way he looked past her instead of at her. She had heard it in the absence of, I love you. So instead she smiled. A small, careful smile. The kind she had perfected over the years. I hope it's everything you want it to be. For a fleeting second, something flickered in Graham's eyes. Recognition, maybe. But it was gone in an instant. It'll be good for both of us, he said simply, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. Some space. Space. Charlotte swallowed the bitter laugh that almost escaped. They had plenty of space already. More than he realized. The beginning of something new. That evening, Charlotte sat in her home office, surrounded by open notebooks and scattered sketches. Her mind was restless. She kept replaying the conversation in her head. The finality in his voice. The way he had walked out the door without a second glance. She was done waiting for him to come back. Charlotte's gaze landed on an old photograph lying on her desk, one from their early days. They had been so young, so full of dreams, She barely recognized the woman in that picture anymore. The woman who had once believed in fairy tales. The woman who had put her own ambitions aside to be the perfect wife. But now she wasn't going to sit in this house, trapped in a life that no longer fit her. No, she had plans of her own. She reached for her notebook and flipped to a fresh page. The pen felt heavy in her hands at first, but as she wrote, the weight began to lift. Ideas flowed. Charity projects, business ventures, everything she had once dreamed of but never pursued. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about proving anything to Graham. This was about rebuilding herself. Because Charlotte Westwood was so much more than a millionaire's wife. She just needed to remember it. The final goodbye. The next morning, Graham packed his designer luggage, barely noticing Charlotte standing in the doorway. He was too focused on selecting the perfect tie to match his suit. She wondered if he would ever notice her again, or if she had already become a ghost in his life. "I hope you have a wonderful trip," she said softly. Graham barely looked up as he responded, "Thanks. I'll be in touch." She nodded, but as he walked down the hallway, suitcase in tow, something inside her shifted. She wasn't sad. She wasn't angry. She was just done. As the front door closed behind him, she stood there for only a moment. Then she turned and walked back to her office. There was work to do, and she wasn't going to waste another second waiting for a man who had already left. The cracks in paradise. The private jet cut through the sky like a silver blade, gliding above a sea of clouds. Inside, everything was flawless, from the polished mahogany bar stocked with the finest champagne to the plush leather seats designed for absolute comfort. Yet, despite the luxury surrounding him, Graham Westwood felt uneasy. He sat near the window, swirling a glass of scotch in his hand, staring blankly at the vast, blue expanse outside. Across from him, Vivian Hart was flipping through a fashion magazine, her long, manicured fingers lazily turning the pages. The scent of her expensive perfume, a mix of jasmine and something sharper, lingered in the air. She was beautiful, no doubt. But at this moment, her presence did nothing to settle the gnawing discomfort growing inside him. The dream vacation begins. Monaco was just as extravagant as Graham remembered. The moment they landed, a fleet of luxury cars waited for them, the drivers standing in crisp black suits, ready to take them wherever they pleased. Vivian slid into a sleek black Bentley, adjusting her designer sunglasses as if preparing for a photo shoot. "Now this," she sighed, stretching her arms over the cream leather interior, "is the life." Graham forced a smile, but it felt hollow. They were staying at the Hotel de Paris Monte Carlo, an architectural marvel of white marble and gold accents. Their suite was a palace within a palace, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering Mediterranean. Vivian wasted no time slipping into something more revealing, a silk robe that left little to the imagination, as she lounged on the balcony, sipping champagne. "Come on, darling," she purred. "Relax." But Graham couldn't. Instead, he stood by the window, staring out at the ocean, watching the waves crash against the shore in their eternal, unbothered rhythm. An unexpected message. That evening, they attended a high-profile gala filled with celebrities, billionaires, and politicians. The air buzzed with laughter, the clinking of crystal glasses, and whispers of high-stakes business deals. Vivian was in her element, draped in a crimson gown that shimmered under the chandelier lights. She clung to Graham's arm, flashing her most dazzling smile as she networked with the elite. Graham, on the other hand, felt disconnected. His mind was elsewhere. It wasn't until his phone buzzed in his pocket that his thoughts snapped back to reality. At first, he ignored it. Then, out of habit, he glanced at the screen. A text message. From a number he hadn't seen in a long time. Charlotte. His heart did something strange. A slight hitch, a sensation he hadn't felt in years. Charlotte never texted him anymore. With slightly unsteady fingers, he tapped the screen and read the message. "I just wanted to let you know I'll be making some changes while you're away. Hope you have a great trip." Graham frowned. Changes? What kind of changes? For some reason, the idea of Charlotte making decisions without him unsettled him. He started to type a response, something casual, something indifferent. But he hesitated. Vivian leaned in, her breath warm against his ear. "Who's that?" she asked playfully. "No one important," Graham muttered, locking his phone and slipping it back into his pocket. But the feeling didn't leave him. Back home, a new chapter begins. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Charlotte Westwood was anything but idle. The morning after Graham left, she woke up feeling lighter than she had in years. There was no sound of his hurried footsteps, no rushed calls interrupting breakfast, no lingering sense of emptiness following her from room to room. Instead, there was peace. And with that peace came clarity. She poured herself a cup of coffee and walked into her office, where stacks of business proposals and charity blueprints covered her desk. This was her future now. She had spent years supporting Graham's ambitions, hosting extravagant events in his name, attending meetings where she was expected to smile and nod. But today, she was making a different choice. She reached for the first document, a proposal for a scholarship fund aimed at helping underprivileged women start their own businesses. A few months ago, she might have hesitated. Now she picked up her pen and signed her name without a second thought. She wasn't just going to survive without Graham. She was going to thrive. Graham's discontent grows. Back in Monaco, Graham sat by the infinity pool at their private villa, staring at his untouched drink. Vivian was nearby, posing for pictures against the sunset, posting each one to social media with carefully crafted captions about their perfect getaway. Graham should have felt content. Instead, he felt nothing. His mind kept drifting back to Charlotte's message. And the more he thought about it, the more uneasy he became. He pulled out his phone and hesitated before finally sending a text back. "What kind of changes?" Charlotte's response came quickly. "You'll see when you get back." That didn't sit right with him. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Why did this bother him so much? Vivian appeared at his side, wrapping her arms around him. "Put the phone away," she murmured, pressing a kiss to his cheek. "You're supposed to be enjoying this." Graham forced another hollow smile. But in the pit of his stomach, something told him that things were about to be very different when he got home. A new beginning. For the first time in a long time, Charlotte wasn't thinking about Graham. She had a meeting scheduled with Eleanor Grant, one of the most respected philanthropists in the country. A woman who had once told her, "You are so much more than someone's wife." As Charlotte walked into the elegant restaurant where their meeting was set, she felt something she hadn't in years. Excitement, anticipation, purpose. She wasn't Mrs. Westwood today. She was Charlotte. And that was more than enough. The tables have turned. Graham Westwood had always believed he had the upper hand in life. Wealth, power, influence. For years, everything had moved according to his will. Deals closed on his terms. People obeyed his decisions. Charlotte waited for him, accommodating his every demand with quiet grace. But as he stepped off the private jet, returning home from his extravagant trip, something felt off. A strange weight settled in his chest as he walked through the airport terminal, his expensive leather duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Vivian walked beside him, scrolling through her phone, oblivious to his tension. The trip had been flawless on paper. Monaco, the Maldives, champagne, luxury yachts, 5-star resorts. Yet, for the first time in his life, Graham had felt like an outsider in his own dream. And now, standing in the arrivals hall, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something had changed. Something was waiting for him. An empty house. The Westwood mansion loomed before him, just as grand as ever. But the moment he stepped inside, Graham knew something was different. It wasn't cold the way it used to be. It wasn't just a house filled with expensive silence anymore. There was life. He saw fresh flowers on the entryway table, New furniture in the living room. Laughter in the air, faint but present, voices echoing from down the hall. His grip on his duffel bag tightened. He set it down slowly, scanning the house like he had stepped into a stranger's home. Then he saw Miriam, the housekeeper, walking past the hallway, humming a tune as she carried a tray of fresh tea. She gasped when she saw him. "Oh, Mr. Westwood, you're home." There was no urgency in her voice, no rush to cater to his needs, just a calm acknowledgement. He frowned. "Where's Charlotte?" Miriam hesitated, then smiled. "She's in a meeting." "A meeting? Charlotte?" He barely kept his surprise from showing. "Here." Miriam nodded, then motioned toward the home office, the same office where he had once found her sitting alone, staring at the walls. Only now, the doors were slightly ajar, and instead of silence, there was conversation. Graham stepped forward, his pulse quickening. He could hear Charlotte speaking. Her voice was different, stronger, clearer, and she wasn't alone. He peeked inside, and everything he thought he knew came crashing down. Charlotte's new world. Inside the office, Charlotte sat behind a sleek new desk, her posture poised, her expression focused. She wasn't just occupying the space. She owned it. Across from her sat Eleanor Grant, the well-known philanthropist and business mogul. And next to Eleanor, a man. Tall, polished, wearing a tailored suit that rivaled Graham's own, and laughing at something Charlotte had just said. Graham's stomach twisted. Charlotte looked radiant. There was a light in her eyes, a fire that he hadn't seen in years. And the way she smiled, it wasn't for him. For the first time in a long time, she looked truly alive. And she hadn't even noticed he was there. Something inside Graham snapped. He cleared his throat loudly. The conversation halted. Charlotte's gaze finally flickered up, and when she saw him standing there, her expression didn't change. No shock, no relief, just calm indifference. "Graham," she said smoothly, "you're back." It wasn't a question. It wasn't excitement. It was a simple statement of fact. He took a step inside, feeling like a stranger in his own home. "What's going on?" Charlotte exchanged a glance with Eleanor before setting down her pen. "Just a business meeting," she said. "Business, Charlotte." Graham clenched his jaw, struggling to find his footing. "I got your text. You said there were changes." Her smile was polite, unbothered. "There are." She gestured around the room. "You always said space would be good for us," she added. "So, I took your advice." It was like a punch to the gut. Because for the first time, Graham realized what had happened. Charlotte had moved on. While he was off chasing pleasure, Charlotte had been rebuilding herself. And now, she wasn't just his wife waiting at home anymore. She was her own person. She was free. And he had never felt more lost. The mistress who never won. Vivian entered the office then, her heels clicking against the marble floors. She placed a delicate hand on Graham's arm, her voice smooth as silk. "There you are, darling," she purred. Charlotte's gaze flickered to Vivian, but there was no anger. No jealousy, just quiet amusement. Like she had already won a battle Graham didn't even realize he had lost. Vivian turned to Charlotte, offering a condescending smile. "I'm sure this is quite an adjustment for you." Charlotte merely raised an eyebrow. "What is?" Vivian let out a soft laugh, glancing at Graham. "Seeing him with me." Charlotte tilted her head slightly, considering her. Then she exhaled a slow, measured breath and smiled. "Oh, Vivian," she said softly, almost kindly. Then she stood, walking around the desk, stopping just inches away from Graham. Her eyes met his, steady, unwavering. "I was never competing with you." Vivian blinked. "What?" Charlotte leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a gentle whisper. "I already let him go." And just like that, the final piece of Graham's illusion shattered. The realization. Graham stood there, watching Charlotte turn away from him, returning to her seat as if he was nothing more than a passing memory. She had won, not because she had fought for him, but because she no longer cared. He had spent so much time chasing something fleeting, only to realize he had lost the one thing that actually mattered, and he could never get it back. Vivian, sensing the shift, tightened her grip on his arm. "Let's go," she whispered, trying to pull him away. But Graham didn't move. For the first time, he didn't want to leave. For the first time, he regretted everything. But it was too late. Charlotte had already walked away. And this time, she wasn't looking back. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.